Welcome to the Truth Over Comfort show. Today's returning guest is Joseph Solis-Mullen. It's great to have him here again. We previously spoke about China, some of the escalations of that time. I think the interview was about 5 months ago now. We also went through the opium wars and kind of different historical subjects. He's here again today, and of course his new book that's come out that's based on some of his articles and his long work on China, the fake China threat, and its very real danger. How are you doing today?
I'm really good. Thank you for having me.
So obviously, I just kind of mentioned the book there, and some people obviously in certain circles, antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute will know who you are and may have seen that you have a new book out, but do you just want to kind of tell people kind of the short kind of brief blurb of what the book is and kind of the work that you've put in for it?
Sure, thanks. So the book came about because the public discourse surrounding China over the past several years has changed significantly. And as is often the case, we've seen this repeatedly in history. If you go back to the 1970s and 1980s, there were hysterical books being written about Japan, the rise of Japan, the re-rise of Japan, actually. And then, back in the 50s and 60s, the possible re-rise of West Germany. So this wasn't a new phenomenon, but the tendency is to go from strategic partner, developing nation, to they're 100 feet tall and are going to eat us all. That's just not what's going to happen. And so I took a step-by-step look at not only China's history, although I thought that was important, and that's the first chapter of the book after the introduction, because so many, I wrote this primarily for an American audience. I would love it if European readers picked it up too, because I think they should really be smart and resist the U.S. push towards confrontation with China. It does not serve any European state's interest to be confrontational with China. But I wrote this primarily for the United States audience because my government is the one that's going to be leading the charge for any kind of conflict with China. And you have politicians like Senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, giving speeches about how, well, if we let the Russians or Chinese have their way right, in their immediate vicinity, we might as well just take down the flag in, the Virginia naval yards and stuff. And it's like, there has to be some middling ground between acknowledging, yes, China and Russia in their immediate vicinity are strong enough that if they say they want something, rightly or wrongly, and they say there are red lines surrounding it, it would be very foolish not to take them seriously. And of course, I know you've spoken with people about, the Ukraine conflict at length. We mentioned the the potential for conflict over Taiwan. I do go into the history there with Taiwan. I also bring it to the present. I talk about some of the most recent developments in Sino-American relations. I talk about the way the media in the United States has changed their presentation, about how there's a whole cottage publishing industry now around churning out books about the fake China threat. About every other month, actually, there is a new book coming out about how, when Beijing rules the world, invasion imminent, just all these crazy books. And I have a whole list of them in one of toward the end of the book. I just rattled them off. There's like 50 of them, all published in the last like 3, 4, 5 years. And then because, as you said, I am one of the Libertarian Institute's writers, the anti-war crowd. I recognize that to sell that group on this idea, it's really enough to just say, non-interventionism, what goes on in China is none of our business. That's a Chinese question. But I recognize that because we are such a minority, I needed to make arguments that would speak in some way to people who are more hawkish, who are not that naturally opposed to fighting other states, crazy or not, in my opinion. And so I include a whole chapter about China's internal and external weaknesses and why I think it is that it will struggle even to be a regional hegemon in Southeast Asia, even if the United States does nothing at all, which of course it's doing a great deal, and we can talk about that if you want.
So obviously some people might interpret that as kind of, the Hawks argument that, some of them say China is on the, imminent collapse, or, or it's the other way around. Why do you see them as not being to project influence even kind of regionally, or as kind of people would expect a classic kind of empire to kind of achieve?
Well, the reasons for that are several. One of them is historical. The Vietnamese, the Koreans, the Philippines, India, they're not particularly interested in having a Chinese military presence on their soil. And that's one of the things that you really need if you're going to project an imperial presence, is you need small military outposts dotting the map. And we had talked about Anglo-American imperial history, and of course that's one of the first things that you need. And with the United States, it's a little bit different because they're able to, manipulate things to get, invitations to a lot of these places. But at the same time, they're not a neighbor. The United States is incredibly far away. The United States is not going to conquer or take over any of these places. They pose no significant military threat to holding these places. Whereas all of these little states that surround, big and little, states that surround China, all have a long history with China, all have their own reasons for wanting to maintain their autonomy over China. So they're going to try and balance the necessary relations, let's say economic relations, that they'll need to have with China, with taking care of their own concerns about authority, autonomy, and security. With regard to the economic influence, though, which is very real, I write about this as well in the book. China has been in a wonderful position for the last 30, 40 years as just a major exporting hub that was able to translate its massive population surplus of working age people and rock bottom wages, zero worker protections, zero environmental regulations. They were able to turn all of that into basically full employment for 2 generations. That's all going away now. More and more, whenever I buy some cheap thing, at Walmart or whatever, which is the big superstore here in the United States, I pick it up and look. And it used to be always China. Now more and more you're seeing Thailand, Vietnam. And that's what's going to happen because wages have risen so much in China, and they've had to do more about environmental degradation, because that's one of the things that the regime does allow and see protests over, is environmental degradation. So that's pretty much the story there. They will have influence, but they're not going to have a military presence in their neighboring countries. Their navy is going to be relatively hemmed in and constrained in a very busy area, and that's one of the things that really makes me nervous. Is there are some Twitter accounts that track ship movements and deployments in the South and East China Sea, and man, is it jam-packed in there. It's real busy, and it's bristling with everything from American to Chinese to British to Japanese to Indian. Oh man, and just if something ever happens there, for whatever reason, a Maine type incident, I don't know what's going to happen. So it's the idea that China will be able to dictate what goes on in that region, shut people out. Why would they want to shut people out? Like their internal consumer market is on the decrease. China's population has already peaked. India is actually more populous than China now, and China's population is horribly graying. They need people to come in and buy stuff. They need to export stuff, and their major export markets are in Western Europe and in the United States. So they have no desire to fight with the United States. But the price of normalization with relations with the United States, which the United States agreed to in a series of communiques, was acknowledgement that Taiwan was part of China and that the legitimate government of China was in Beijing. And so as the United States starts to walk that back, which I think we've seen, and I have a chapter in the book about that as well, changing the status quo. I mean, again, it's like with Russia. Like, is it right for Russia to invade Ukraine? No, that was never the argument. The argument was this Russian guy who happens to command their armed forces says, look, if you don't stop doing this, I'm going to invade this country. I mean, she has said the same thing. Like, if Taiwan declares independence, that's going to be an invasion. That's been policy all along. And so encouraging the Taiwanese in this manner which I think the Biden administration has done by saying that we would fight for Taiwan, when for years it was strategic ambiguity. Don't tell Beijing we will or won't. Don't tell Taiwan we will or we won't. Keep them both guessing and just maintain the status quo. That's worked well for 30, 40 years now. Why it needs to change, I don't think it does. But there are internal domestic pressures in the United States that are causing that to happen. But of course, Taiwan will have an election this coming year, and I think the Democratic Progressive Party may lose. This is the independence inclined party. They got smoked in regional elections this last year, and obviously regional elections are not national elections. But I think there's a very strong chance that the KMT candidate could wind up winning. But the media coverage has been very interesting. You know, I remember when he first announced he was going to run, the major thing that the New York Times had to tell you about him was he believes that he was told in a dream by a god that he should do it. And it was like just trying to make him seem like a kook, right? So
what is it? Because obviously you mentioned there about the elections and where that could go. What is actually the view within Taiwan of kind of the actions that the government's taking of escalation with the US against China? So how does the population inside Taiwan see this balance kind of between China and the US? Do they want independence, or are they starting to realize, maybe looking at Ukraine or other places, that may not be worth it or beneficial, or they're just generally kind of not interested in it at all, and they're kind of happy to kind of have a bit of autonomy but ultimately be part of China, as you mentioned with the one China policy in the 3 communiques?
yes, it's interesting. The public polling data that we have over the past several years, it's been fairly consistent in many ways. It's fairly evenly split, but the majority do not want to be reunified with China, and those feelings have increased over the last several years, especially when they looked at what happened with Hong Kong. Now, I don't want to get sidetracked with Hong Kong. That's a whole nother discussion. But basically, over the last several years, there's also been this increasing pushback against being super hyper nationalist about it. I think a lot of the Taiwanese are just happy with the status quo. They're rich. They make their own decisions. They're autonomous. China, going back, gosh, let's see, it's 2029. So going back 10 years, I mean, prior to the confrontations increasing in the South China Sea, it was pretty rare for them to see any kind of Chinese aggression. Now, this last year, they experienced what a blockade would be like after Speaker Pelosi's visit. And I think that was very sobering, because it completely shut down shipping, and that was nothing. I mean, Beijing can do that with the snap of its fingers anytime it wants and cripple Taiwan. And unlike Ukraine, which has these really long, nice borders with a bunch of NATO countries where you can get weapons in and out of there, men, materiel, no problem, Taiwan is an island, and it's actually, I mean, the landward facing side, the water is actually quite shallow. I mean, the idea of resupplying that thing, I do wonder whether or not we're going to wind up with kind of a reverse Cuban Missile Crisis, where it's China that's trying to prevent a U.S. supply convoy from going in there, and we're gonna wind up with another standoff where someone's gonna have to blink, and I really do worry, because gosh, politicians are just so gross, and they're mostly concerned with their own political survival. And that cost Khrushchev, right? He got cooed out. Kennedy said, if you tell anybody about our secret deal for me to remove those Jupiter missiles from Turkey, the deal's off, because I'll get crushed in the election, and it's really gross and sick. But that's public choice theory for you. The idea of the national interest. The national interest is very hard to see, because it's an agglomeration of real geographical and military imperatives run through the filter of multiple different agencies and the individual incentive structures that these people face. The war in Libya is a great example there, where a couple of Obama administration, securocrats basically thought this would make their career. And so, Taiwan, the majority just want the status quo to remain. They increasingly think the KMT are the ones who can make that happen. When the Democratic Progressive Party members were, meeting with Speaker McCarthy, or I think, he was Speaker by that point, Kevin McCarthy out in California, the KMT had sent a delegation to Beijing to basically say, look, the elections are coming up, we win, we're going to really settle things down, which would be good for everyone. This arrangement has been nothing but good for Taiwan. Taiwan has become highly advanced, rich. I mean, they're doing great, and I don't think that China is going to get stronger. I think we're seeing close to peak China right now, just for a variety of reasons. I cover them in the book, but
yeah, just actually kind of what you mentioned there is, why do you think people are so, you just said there that, it's good for everyone, China, Taiwan, and the world, if the US and China get on, and Taiwan. Why do you think in the public there's such a kind of obsession around this? I mean, I know obviously there's the media and the constant kind of referrals to like the Uyghurs, and then the air balloon story and these constant kind of China like comments. Do you see that as kind of the main reason there's such an obsession with Taiwan, even though it's kind of completely counterproductive? No one wants a world war. No one wants to be nuked. And you can't really say why you care that much about Taiwan, this little island, when, there's stuff going on around the world all the time that no one cares about. Why do you kind of see this dynamic in the public, that in the US and the UK, less in, Europe, that there's this obsession with helping the Taiwanese people?
Right. And isn't that the truth? I mean, there's horrible stuff happening every day in places around the world, and the U.S. media has no interest in it, and that's because it's irrelevant in the eyes of kind of the imperial vision. Doesn't need that kind of stuff. The reason that Ukraine became a focal point is the same reason Taiwan has become such a focal point. Number one, it's a place where you can stick tons and tons, billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons. It's the same reason we couldn't get the Yemen war stopped, because the Saudi Arabians wanted to buy tons of Raytheon missiles. And it's I still remember Wolf Blitzer on CNN. He was interviewing Rand Paul, the senator. You're familiar with the clip, where he said, so your opposition is that it's morally wrong to bomb people? Don't you realize how good it is for our economy, all these workers?
So for you, this is a moral issue, because there's a lot of jobs at stake. Certainly, if a lot of these defense contractors stop selling warplanes, other sophisticated equipment to Saudi Arabia, there's going to be a significant loss of jobs and revenue here in the United States. That's secondary from your standpoint.
Well, not only is it a moral question, it's a constitutional question. Our founding fathers very directly and specifically did not give the president the power to go to war. They gave it to Congress. So Congress needs to step up, and this is what I'm doing, stepping up and asserting our authority over foreign policy, and that we need to be involved. We should not be an after the fact, oh, we'll give you a consultation. No, we should be directing the president.
It's quite insane. No, and when you look at these weapons companies and these regimes that want our support, this is a critical point. The Saudis and Taiwanese and Ukrainians all spend a lot of money lobbying Washington, and they also spend money funding think tanks. Now, these think tanks are where you get your experts from, who will go on the television and tell the American people what to think about this issue. There's really only one thing now, and it's become very mainstream. You hear Republican candidates during the debates talk about now, and that's the chips, right? The microchips. Now, number one, the microchips aren't worth a world war over. Number two, China's not talking about invading Taiwan. Number three, even if China possessed, TSMC's facilities, which it wouldn't, because as we talked about, the United States government would blow it up before it let that happen.
So that geopolitically, it'd be a disaster if China took Taiwan. Number two, it goes to your point of the chips. 90% of our the small 5 nanometer and less chips, silicon chips, are made by TSMC in Taiwan. And if China has not been able to replicate that industry, unlike many other industries that they've been able to replicate in their own country, if they got control of those TSMC factories and research facilities, they'd be the new OPEC of silicon chips and control the world economy. Now, let's face it, that's never going to happen. I mean, the United States and its allies are never going to let those factories fall into Chinese hands, even if there was a successful invasion of Taiwan. I mean, you're looking at something similar to what happened with the French fleet when Vichy France surrendered to Germany. The Brits didn't allow the French fleet to remain intact so that it could have potentially gone to the Germans and changed the balance of power in the battle for the Atlantic. So
they bombed that fleet.
That fleet was destroyed, and it was like Churchill walked into the House of Commons. He was a Francophile with tears streaming down his face because it was the hardest decision he made in the war. And yet he was greeted by unanimous applause as he entered the House because they understood how important that was to the future of Great Britain and the ability to continue the struggle against Nazi Germany. And again, I think you'd have a very similar situation here. I don't think TSMC factories, research facilities, things of that nature fall into the Chinese hands, even if they were somehow successful in the invasion.
They would be gone, is what you're saying. They would be gone if the Chinese successfully took Taiwan. Those facilities and production capacity would be gone. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I can't imagine they'd be intact.
That's fascinating.
Gets back to sort of using deterrence, and how does the chip sort of policies that the U.S. adopts create a deterrence?
Well, I mean, this is one of the interesting ideas that's floated out there for deterrence is just making it very clear to the Chinese that if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC. I just throw that out not because that's necessarily the best strategy, but because it's an example of debate that's out there. And of course, the Taiwanese really don't like this idea, right? So as we think through what this strategy needs to be, we've got to think again about the sort of second and third order implications here of where this leads us. Are we fostering a very successful domestic Chinese chip industry that's eventually going to catch up to where we are we adequately controlling, and sort of keeping them, keeping that lead that Chris just described in place? These are some of the questions that I think we're struggling to answer as we figure out what this economic.
Can I have a little inter-party dispute here on the blowing up TSMC? If you do that, you have a $2 trillion economic impact on the global economy within the first year, and you'd put manufacturing around the world at a standstill. I mean, this is a terrible idea.
I'm not promoting the idea. I'm not promoting the idea, Michelle.
You're just saying making the threat.
What I'm saying is these are some of the things that are actually actively being debated amongst U.S. Policymakers. And by the way, if China takes over TSMC, whether it's a Hong Kong style takeover or they take over by actually invading it and actually able to capture this thing intact, we could very well face the same level of economic consequences, not globally, but for the United States.
China would still want to sell them to the world. Why would they want to just keep them for themselves? It's like Osama bin Laden said way back in the 90s, that even if there was a big caliphate and, all this other stuff, like they would still want to sell the oil to the rest of the world. They would just want the money. But you've heard McCall from Texas, the rep from Texas, who I believe is the head of the House Foreign Relations Committee. I'm fairly certain of that. But he went on Meet the Press, and they said, well, and he said, why should we fight for Taiwan? And he said, well, there's semiconductors there, and it's the new oil of the new digital economy. And he goes on, blah blah blah. And the guy says, so it's kind of like war for oil. And he says, well, that's how some people see it. I view it more as democracy, freedom. And he starts repeating the usual shibboleths, But we see this all the time. Lindsey Graham, huge China hawk. Tons of connections with those think tanks. Bob Menendez, literally getting paid money. I mean, literally under investigation for corruption now. I mean, this stuff goes on all the time. So it's no wonder why the American people are being fed this constant stream of information about why China is so dangerous. The other one is the fentanyl epidemic. Trying to blame China for that when really it's not China's fault at all. Are there precursor chemicals coming from China? Sure. I mean, they could be coming from somewhere else. And if they stopped coming from China, they'd start coming from somewhere else. And maybe if the United States government wasn't being so provocative and disrespectful towards Beijing, Beijing might be inclined to do something about it. But as things stand right now, they just don't have any interest in that.
Yeah, that one's always a bit of a silly one because, you willing to, part of the reason for fighting a war against China or Taiwan and hating them, fentanyl, but forget about the opioid crisis, in America and all the companies there who got away with murder and made all this money. Forget that, it's got to be an external something to blame.
Yeah.
It's always that. Just a kind of a good, can you just kind of lay out for people the air balloon story? Because I think that was a good one.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, so much stuff has happened since then. These things just get forgotten, and it's like interviews like this. People,
I'll take that back. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I don't know if this was a big story in Europe or not, but in the United States, it took over, and it was a week of just the craziest stuff. It actually lasted about 2 weeks. But back in, I think it was late January or early February, I forget now, this weather balloon came drifting down from Alaska, crossed over Canada, across the United States. Now, on Monday, we were all told that, it's no big deal. It's an off-course weather balloon. Happens all the time. It's not a military threat. By, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that, this thing is carrying probably bioweapons. They're spying on us. We need to shoot it down. We need to retaliate. So they do. They shoot it down, right? Cause a huge kerfuffle. Blinken cancels his visit to Beijing. It was going to be the first high-level meeting they'd had. Fast forward 6 months to July. This tiny, tiny little blurb comes out from the Defense Department, and Reuters ran it. And it said, yeah, it wasn't a spy balloon. Yeah. The Pentagon says, yeah, it wasn't a spy balloon. We were just fucking with you. Just kidding. It's just crazy to me because the story never made sense. And if you didn't believe it, you were just some useful idiot for Xi Jinping and the communists who are going to spy on us and, deploy nanobots over America or something. Just the craziest crap. I was too young, but I know about this just from reading about it. The whole Saddam Hussein was going to use his secret plywood drones to spread anthrax all over the United States. You can just get people to believe anything, and it's. It's really fairly depressing because I actually usually go to bat for my fellow Americans and say, they're smart on an individual level. When you talk to a person, they're very smart, but when you have them all together, people tend to be dumb. So I don't know. That was a great example of media prompted hysteria. Gosh, it was such a disheartening moment.
This is also a great example of, a news story comes out, there's a big, mess about it in the public, everyone's really angry, emotions are high, it kind of seems to escalate, and then, days or a month later, a few news cycles away, a couple media organizations, sometimes more, sometimes less, will report, oh no, we retract that story.
Yeah.
No one knows about it, because it's in the fine print, as you say, and they're not going to, put as much kind of power into, constant news stories of, oh, by the way, we need to let you know this was incorrect. All those emotions, all those calls for, aggression on them, any tweets you put up about we need to do this against China, put that aside because that was, built up artificially and, incorrectly. There's just one little story put out, sorry about that. We know the emotions have already taken over, but it's too late. It's just a perfect example of that. And, even if you read that was retracted, the kind of the emotion there still builds up because the next time a story comes out, you'll jump on it again because you hardly have that inkling towards it. And I know we don't have loads of time left. I realized actually last time we spoke, we didn't talk about the Uyghurs. I know that would take too long, but are you happy to lay that out for
very
people?
quickly? Yeah, very quickly I can.
Yeah, Yeah, go on.
Sure. And I have a whole chapter on it in the book if people are actually really interested on it. So I guess very basically, we're it really depends. And like I said, it's a very subtle issue because the definition of genocide and what was going on there, very gray area stuff. But really what was going on here was you have this population, some members of whom have at various points, the Uyghurs in the 20th century had an independent state. Now, it was very short-lived. The KMT crushed it in I believe, the 30s, and then the communists crushed it, I believe, in the 50s. I don't have the dates right in front of me. But so the Uyghurs are a distinct ethnic group, right? China has like 60 or 70 different ethnic groups. They're highly localized and concentrated. They are Muslim. They're Central Asian. There were a series of pretty horrific terrorist attacks in Beijing, Shanghai, other large commercial centers in China. They were all perpetrated by a group associated with the Uyghurs, and they were Uyghurs. Okay, so just like what happens, again, it's wrong. Of course it's wrong. Contextualizing it, though, is not defending it, and I hope that's clear. And so the Chinese government essentially undertook to, quote unquote, de-radicalize the population, right? Just like the United States rounded up all its Japanese people and put them in internment camps during World War II because they were a, quote, unreliable population. That's exactly how Beijing viewed the Uyghurs. The whole thing's about like mass rape and sterilization and stuff. That's all been pretty discredited. There was one guy, Adrian Zenz, who was doing a lot of that work, and numerous problems have been pointed out in his research. And I provide citations for the people who refuted his research there, quote unquote research. He's really, an ideological, guy, not really a serious academic in my opinion. But no, so I mean, it was horrible. They rounded them up. They were, surveilling them all the time. It was terrible. At the same time, was it genocide? Was it an attempt to, destroy these people and their languages? No, not at all. I mean, their broadcasts were still in their own language. No one was trying to make them start speaking, or studying Confucian texts or Marxist dialectics. They had some, well, I shouldn't say that. They did have a program where they were supposed to be learning about these things, but it wasn't like you have to throw away your local traditions, So I don't know. The Uyghurs are one of those things where it's like, of course this was wrong. You shouldn't do that to people. On the other hand, it's in China. It's this one small population in China. What are we supposed to do about that? Is this supposed to define U.S. relations with China, the other single most important state in the world? No. Human rights don't dictate our relationship with Egypt, even though Egypt's human rights record is garbage. It doesn't do that with Saudi Arabia or Israel. It's just so obvious. When someone like Mike Pompeo, who was happy to just blow up Muslims for years on end in the Middle East, leaves off and says, it breaks my heart to see those Muslims being mistreated in China. If you can believe that, I have no hope. I have no hope. If you believe people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo are sincerely motivated to confront China on this issue because of their love for Muslims, and not because it's a useful stick with which to try and beat China with, you're just hopeless. So,
and you'd also think in the paradigm of the war on terror in 9/11, where attacks that happened on us from Muslims were completely seen as sympathetic towards that, and we fought all these wars over it. So even if China was being worse than even stated against them, that's exactly what the US and NATO did in the Middle East, and still continues to do.
Yes.
Just can you just kind of present how, you kind of mentioned it, but just overblown is kind of presented. So you've presented probably, maybe more than other people would even go to with the Uyghur story, calling it entirely fake. So can you just kind of do the other side of how the media has kind of overblown it for the Uyghur story?
Yeah, sure. And again, I don't feel like I really fall into either camp. I really tried to draw I just try to look at the facts. Like, this is, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not paid by any interest group to write or do this research. I am mostly motivated to do this because of how crazy all this talk is. And the idea that we can't get it, they have nukes, we have nukes, we're not actually going to fight. Like, that is not necessarily true. We could fight a war and have it be non-nuclear. I mean, you hear U.S. admirals now saying we're preparing to fight, sometime in the next few years. Like, they actually are planning this huge air-sea battle where, like, I don't know, 200,000 people could die. That's a lot of people. And, who knows, climb that escalation ladder. No, the story in the media is that China has been ethnically cleansing and genociding these Central Asian Muslims, that they've been locking them up, that they've been having Han Chinese guards rape and inseminate these people, and that they're trying to root out their religion and culture. And there's actually legislation now that prevents goods coming into the United States that have been produced in Xinjiang, the province there, because they accuse them of using slave labor. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know you got to. Do you need to jump off like right now, or you got time to just kind of like a final kind of just statement summing up?
Let's have a final.
Yeah, so I guess just we've had, obviously it's only been half hour. If we had more time, we could have maybe gone into more of kind of the US escalation side. You've kind of given a fairly balanced side of both things, but do you want to kind of just give a final message you want to convey to people about how the US conducts itself against China, and how kind of China's react to that? Just basically sum up kind of your general feelings of this new Cold War, and what people you think should think about it.
So I'll end with this. I'm a huge fan of British history, and I kind of view the United States right now as at that early 20th century moment where the British Empire was starting to become challenged by other industrializing powers. And that in an attempt to prevent one of these powers, specifically Germany, from rising to the level of a peer competitor, it sought a pretext, Belgian neutrality, to enter a war that ultimately crippled, bankrupt, and destroyed it. When really they could have found a way to coexist. What would that not have been better than the alternative? Europe destroyed itself. For what? Over Morocco, who was dominating Egypt? I mean, this was just crazy. And this could be the end of the world. If the United States and China get into it and it goes hot, like, this could literally be the end of the world. There's no reason for it at all. Just as Europeans in 1913 were living far better than they would for decades and decades. And this was, of course, before nuclear weapons. So just think now, like, we're living very well right now. Obviously, things could always be better, but things could get a lot worse. And you try and think of all the ways that life could be better. I think you can think of a lot more ways it could be worse. And the U.S. and China going to war, oh yeah, that's as bad as it gets. So push back against the fake China threat. Don't let them tell you that, your lives and liberty and property are under threat from the Chinese Communist Party. They're mostly under threat from your own government. So, yeah, in Britain as well.
I think that's a pretty good way to sum it up. World War II is a bit more of a sticky subject for people, but World War I is pretty, seen as a war that just really didn't need to happen. And as you said, Germany was rising as a power against Britain. And again, there's obviously all the blame kind of goes on the Kaiser, but there's so much, more context to it. And the UK or the British absolutely did see Germany as that threat that the US sees China as, that's going to rise above it. And really hope that we don't get dragged into some World War nuclear weapons over Taiwan, because there's plenty of other Taiwans around the world that you really don't care about and don't ever even think about or know. So I think that's probably a good way to end it. I recommend people obviously check out your work, check out your articles at the Libertarian Institute, and get your book. I will definitely get that book to read about China, because I know it's going to be a really great piece of work. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for writing the book, and I'd love to talk to you again. Maybe we can
Definitely.
talk about British American history.
Yeah, we need to. That's when we need to have. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me.